We should know about the servlet container first. Okay. Before going to talk about servlets here, we should know about servlet container first. So why we should know about container here? Servlets are server-side Java classes. These are server-side Java classes. So these are server-side Java classes. What they will do? They will read. They are capable to read the data which is coming from browser. So why these classes only capable to read the data? Why? Because your container will allow only servlet classes to read data which is coming from browser. So you should talk about first container here. To run servlets, what we required? These server-side Java classes. If you want to execute, then you required a servlet container. How to execute these classes? How to execute? How to run these classes? How to run? To run these servlet classes, we required a servlet container. To run servlet classes, it's required servlet classes requires servlet container. So what this container will do, we know. What exactly the servlet container will do? Whenever you submit your form data from a browser, whenever you submit your form data, let's say if you have one browser here like Internet Explorer, or if you have a browser here like a Chrome browser, if you have a browser here. So whenever you submit your form data from here, this data straight away it will go to your server. So this data when you submit to your server need to respond. So the data will send in the form of HTTP protocol from here. We know HTTP protocol formats. It have two types of header and body. Through header we can send data, through body also we can send data. Okay, if it is header, we know we can call it as query string. If it is a body, we can call it as payload. Okay, so you can submit your data from browser in the form of HTTP protocol. But who can understand this data here? Your container will understand. Which container will understand this data here? Servlet container. Your servlet container will accept first this HTTP protocol data. It will read your HTTP protocol data. Who will read? The servlet classes required servlet container. So your servlet container, first it will read your HTTP protocol data. So in the form of what they will read this data? Once if it get HTTP protocol data, they will make this HTTP protocol data in the form of Java Bean object. So we can call it as HTTP request. It will convert your data into HTTP servlet request object. It will convert your data into HTTP servlet request object. Whatever the HTTP protocol data we are getting, that data it will store in the form of HTTP servlet request. Then later what it will do? This HTTP servlet request object it will forward to your servlet classes. Here you can write servlet classes. Here you can write servlet classes. Then whatever the HTTP protocol data we are submitting from here, that data it will forward to your servlets. Who will do that job? Again, servlet container. So the servlet container it will send the same data to your servlet class. It will send your data to servlet class. Finally, what we can do? We can give response. We can generate response here. That response you should store in the form of HTTP response object. HTTP servlet response. We can store data finally in the form of HTTP protocol. I mean, we need to store in the form of HTTP servlet response. Again, this response it will convert into HTTP protocol. It will convert your response into HTTP protocol. Then the same response it will forward to the user finally. Okay, so the data we need to get in the form of HTTP protocol into the container. Finally, response also we need to give in the form of HTTP protocol only here. And to read data which is coming from browser, which data? HTTP protocol data it will convert into HTTP servlet request object. So this data if you want to get here, then your class should be a servlet class. Your class should be a servlet class, or else your class can be a JSP page, or else you can use here filters. Using any one of these, you can read data which is coming from your browser. All these are same types, servlets or JSPs or filters. Okay, so using any one of these, you can read your data here. But container need to do what? Container will read data, okay fine. It will read your HTTP protocol data. When I submit form data here, container responsibilities are what? When I submit it, when I submit from here, as an end user, if you submit here, as an end user, as an end user if you submit your form data from here. So first to this form data it will send to your server, and server will get data in the form of HTTP protocol. Then later what it need to do? It need to make the data in the form of HTTP servlet request data. Okay, it will convert your data into HTTP servlet request data. Later what it need to do? It need to forward this data to servlet class, right? But which servlet class? You can have any number of servlets here, right? One application can have any number of servlet classes here. So here you can have some 10 number of servlets here. So which servlet class need to respond for this data? Which servlet class it need to execute? I can have A class, B class, C class, D class. I can have many servlet classes here. But when I submit this form data, which servlet class need to execute? Is it need to execute all the servlets? Not required. So it need to execute only particular servlet. Let's say if you have here A servlet, and if you have a B servlet, C servlet, D servlet, which servlet class need to get that input, HTTP servlet request input? How it need to act, how it can navigate it, your servlet container, whenever you submit your form data, how it will decide whether A class or B class or C class or D class need to execute for this browser request? It depends on your URL. It depends on your URL. Let's say if all these servlet classes are there in one application, if that application name is my app, if that application name is my application, if your application name is my application, inside my application if you have classes A servlet, B servlet, C servlet and D servlet. Okay, one servlet container, in one servlet container you can install any number of applications. So here my application name is my app. So here application name is my app. Application name is equal to my app. Application name is my app. So when I need to submit this data to that my app, how I need to enter my URL here? You need to enter URL here, right? So that URL we need to enter in the form of HTTP double colon. If that server is running in your local machine, if it is running in your local machine, localhost, if your IP, if it is local machine, then you can type here localhost. Okay, if this server also there in same machine, you can pass here localhost, or if this browser is there in one machine and if this server is there in one machine, you can pass that server IP address here. Okay, usually in real time browsers will exist in one machine and servers will exist in another machine. At that time what we need to enter here? Instead of entering localhost, we need to enter IP address here. So generally IP address, default IP address 127.0.0.1, or else you can use exact IP address. If you don't know, then you can go through this IP address. Okay, so when you want to submit this data from here to here, you need to pass http:// your machine IP address, or else any domain name also we can enter here. Instead of using this localhost, you can use domain name also here. How we can use, later we'll say. Okay, so here my machine IP address colon, and on which port this server running? By default a Tomcat server will run on a port number 8080. So your port number you need to enter here 8080. So up to here what it will understand, when I enter this URL, it can go to up to server, but in that server it need to call a again application, my app. So here again / you need to enter your application name, my app. You need to enter your application name, my app. And in case if you require this page, let's say if it is simple hello world page, here I have a name along with a text box. So this page, from where it need to load? On browser machine this page will exist, or on server machine this page will exist? Actual page physical location is server. So whatever the hello page you have here, let's say if this page is hello page, in that hello page if you require name and text box and one submit button here. So this page need to design and we need to save here. Where we need to save? Inside my application itself. Let's say here if you have your page, if you have your page here hello.html, my page I have here. Now that hello.html page I want to load here. So then what you should do? Again / inside my application hello.html. So we are giving our page address. We are giving here our application server. Here our application server, servlet container. So servlet container IP address and port number slash inside servlet container my application name slash inside application my page name. And if you click enter, what happens? This data it will send to your browser. Browsers, what they will do whenever they try to load HTML data, they will pass away all the tags and they will show the HTML content here. So they will show our required HTML content here. So then when I pass a name here, when I pass some name here, Naveen, and if I submit here, what happens when I submit? Again this data it will convert into HTTP protocol, and this data need to submit to whom? This data need to go to a servlet class. This data need to go to a servlet class. Then how your container will decide which servlet need to execute? Again it need to have a address, right? So for each servlet also you can configure one address here. You can configure one address. Okay, for a servlet my required address is /hello or else /a. My required address for a servlet is /a, for b /b, for c /c, for d /d. These are my addresses. Okay, address means along with your complete URL up to here /a. So here my address, servlet address is, for this hello.html we have address, right? So complete address we are passing here, so then it will invoke your hello.html page. But if you want to invoke your servlet, you require again address, right? So that address, if I give /a means here, before slash what it will append, here before slash it will append your complete path. Up to application name, this path it will append there. So then your address of servlet is what? http://localhost 8080/myapp/a. So by using that address if I call, then container will do what? It will execute your servlet class. So where that address need to pass? Whenever I submit this form data, to submit this data it need to have an address. So where exactly that address we need to put? While discussing in HTML, I said one important tag is there. The tag is form tag. In that form tag there is one attribute, action. In this action attribute you need to keep your URL http://localhost:8080/a/a or /b or /c. Here it is your action, and here your form content you can be keep here. Name, input type text, and a parameter name equal to some p1, and finally one submit button. Input type submit, value submit, or else you can keep anything here. So while designing this form, while designing this input form, what you should keep here under action? Your servlet address. This is your servlet address. This is your servlet address. When you click on submit button, it will generate address. Which address? That HTTP address it will generate. So here it will replace that address. Actually I have hello.html. This hello.html, when I click on the submit button, it will erase this here and it will keep address /a. Then it will try to submit this data, whatever the data we have here. We know in the form of what the data it will submit, HTTP protocol. And in this HTTP protocol, will it put this data in get or post? I mean, will it keep it in header content or body content? It depends on your form method. By default form method is get, so that your data it will go in the form of URL, query string. It will send your data in the form of query string, so that when I submit here a question mark, your parameter name is what? Parameter name p or p1 equal to, and the name whatever the name you are entering here, Naveen. So this parameter p1 and Naveen, it will submit to your server. Then server need to execute what? Whatever the servlet configured by using this URL, that servlet class it need to invoke. So which servlet class it need to execute? A servlet. So to execute a servlet is a simple, is it a simple like a form? It's a simple Java class, right? This a servlet is a simple Java class. How we can execute Java classes? To execute a Java class we require a object, right? We need to create object. So that who need to create object now here? I know the address. For that address, I know the servlet. So then what I should do? I need to create a object. Who will create that object? Your servlet container. When servlet container will create object, whenever first time user submits this address, whenever user first time submits his address, if it is a first time request, if it is a first request, at the time of first request, based on this address, your servlet container will prepare your servlet object. Actually, all these classes are singleton classes. Singleton means only one object it will create. So when that object it will create, when first user submits this URL. Whenever the first user submits, call for the address. Whenever first user submits his address, based on that address, it will invoke a servlet class. Then that servlet class object it will create. Once after creation of your servlet object, what it will do? Whatever the HTTP request object data it have here, the data it will send to your object methods. After creation of object, we can call methods, right? Inside servlets, we need to write some methods. So it will call into that method, it will pass your HTTP servlet request data. Okay, who will do that job again? Your servlet container.